Welcome to the Department of Renewable Resources Seminar Series for December 1st, 2011. Our speaker today is Chris Powter, Executive Director of the Oil Sands Research and Information Network at the University of Alberta. He will be speaking to us today about information sources for oil sands research.
Thanks, Francis. So before I get started, I'll tell you a little bit about the Oil Sands Research and Information Network, or OSRIN as we like to call it, in case you don't know about us. We are part of the School of Energy and Environment. We've got two primary mandates. One is to fund environmental research related to oil sands mining. If you go on our website, you can see the kinds of projects that we've been funding in the areas that we do funding in. The second part of our mandate is to provide balanced information to the general public and researchers and everyone else about oil sands so that you can form an opinion that's based on looking at a variety of opinions and not just going to one source and thinking that that's the way things are with respect to oil sands. Throughout my career, those of you who know me anyway know that I've had a pretty strong passion for making sure that people have access to information. It's not my job, never has been, to convince you that what I think is right or that the information that I have is right. It's about giving you access to a wide range of information and letting you figure out what's important, what isn't, what you can and can't do with it. Over the years, some of the things that I've seen related to the way people access information and use information have gotten me excited and agitated. And you're going to see a little bit of that in here. But the intent of the presentation is to try and encourage you to use as much information as possible to access it, because I think it adds value to all the work that you do. So 3 caveats to start. First of all, notwithstanding I told you all about OSRIN and how good we are, this is my opinions. It's not those of my employer, the university, nor of OSRIN. The reason I say that is, as I said, I'm really passionate about this subject. I have a number of biases. I'm not going to hide them. And that leads to the third one, which is you may not agree with those biases and passions that I have. If you're at all sensitive, particularly if your stomach gets queasy, then you may want to have a bucket handy as we go through this. So, we work with a whole bunch of things, data, information, knowledge, and wisdom. They do mean different things if you get right down to the definitions. I'm going to be lazy today and use one or more of them interchangeably, and either representing other words or representing all 4 words, just because it's a lot easier than saying data, information, knowledge, and wisdom every time. So I was trying to figure out how to set the context for the presentation and let you know ahead of time what some of my biases might be. And it occurred to me, because I really like money, that there's a lot of similarities between what we do with money, how we gather it, what we do with it, how we manage it, and how we use it, and what we do with information. So I thought I'd pull this together and just try and relate the two to set the context here. So I'd be interested in knowing whether you think this resonates at all. So first of all, I think that information is like currency in terms of the way that we do our business. It's what we sell. Our knowledge, our information is how we market ourselves to others. It's how people value us. I suspect it's how we value ourselves too. But it is certainly how people look at us. They'll compare a junior researcher to a senior researcher and say, well, given a choice, I'll go with the person who knows a lot more or has more experience in dealing with things. It's the commodity that we use when we're teaching. Okay, so the best teachers have a lot of knowledge, but they also have a lot of skills in delivering that knowledge. And it's also, in many cases, how we're judged in terms of our success. It's one of the metrics. So, like money, the more information you have, the better you are. Anytime you go to an investment advisor, they tell you you need to have lots of income sources, you need to be diversified. And my theory is that that's the same with information. If you always go to the same place, always listen to the same people, you're only going to have one point of view. If you go and access a wide range of information sources, some of them you may not like, but you can still get something out of them, I think. And so the more that you have available to you, the better off you're going to be able to do the job that you're trying to do. old information is still information. So there's a lot of people, we'll talk about this later, I think, that don't look at old stuff. They only look at new stuff. And what you end up doing is you see a lot of reinventing the wheel. When old farts like me get together and listen to some new research proposals, often you hear the old farts say, we've done this. Why don't they know that? Why are we reinventing this? And it's in part because people don't go back and look at historical information. Even low-value information has some value to it. I don't mean to pick on the Ugandan shilling as an example, but I was trying to find something that had a giant number relative to a Canadian dollar. So there are many times when you get a document, let's say you went out and you were looking for some information, you get a document, you look at it and you say, well, this doesn't do anything for me for the work that I'm doing. But you might flip back to the references and say, oh, I hadn't seen that one before, maybe I'll go follow that. Or you might say, well, this doesn't help me now, but it's kind of an interesting organization, maybe I'll follow up with them later. Or you might say, well, this doesn't do anything for me, but Sally's working on something like this, maybe I can give it to her, right? So there's still some residual value even in something that you've decided. My concern is that when you make the judgment about low value, is it because it actually doesn't have value, or because you have some filters or blinders on that you've already pre-assigned some value to something, and therefore you've lost the opportunity to gain something that you might otherwise have if you were a little bit more open to the possibilities. My wife and I disagree strongly on how money works. I'm a saver and she's a spender. When we had our marriage course, we talked about how we're going to deal with that. She said we would spend. But information like money really only has value when you use it. It doesn't do anything if you hoard it. So I have a real pet peeve with people who don't release research information, who either because they can't or won't. As far as I'm concerned, if it's not released, it was never done. You may as well just throw it away. So that's the kind of context. A mature and responsible adult would have taken this set of points and converted them into how we can improve things, but then that's really boring if you do that, and it doesn't catch people's attention. So as far as I'm concerned, over time, these are the kinds of things that I think are impediments to using information. As we talked about, there's a range of sources out there. I'm going to go through a whole bunch of them that'll probably make your brain explode. But if you don't know what's out there, you can't actually go and look for it. A lot of us tend to use preferred sources. I always go shop at Safeway, and it doesn't matter what's elsewhere, I just go to Safeway. Well, I miss a whole bunch of opportunities if I don't go to other places. When we're doing searches, and I've got some examples of some terminology issues, but we've got to be really careful about what we're looking for, because if we don't use the right set of search terms, we're going to miss some stuff that might otherwise be available to us. There's a whole pile of stuff that isn't available digitally. When I first came on campus, I went over to the library, was talking to one of the librarians because we're thinking of doing some digitization work, and her first response was, no offense, these young people, if it's not digital, it doesn't exist, right? And I said, well, okay, but that's reality, so let's try and figure out a way to deal with that. But if you're only going to do a digital search, you're going to miss a whole pile of information. As I said, if work isn't published, it's lost. It never happened, and you have lost a sellable commodity that you worked a lot on as the person who prepared it, and the people who can follow from you and learn from it aren't going to be able to do that. I think there's some attitudes. This first one is probably my biggest beef. And it's a really horrible one to have given who my current employer is and all you people staring at me, but I think there's a real problem with the peer review bias. It's not to say that peer review articles and sources are bad, it's just that if we continually tell ourselves that the only place I should go and look is peer-reviewed information, and if we continually tell our students that the only place that they should go and look is peer-reviewed information, for whatever reason, there's a whole raft of stuff that you're not going to access. And I think that's a big loss. We're human beings, and so we tend to focus on the things that we know and the areas that we work in. So we have discipline bias. I'm a biologist, I go look at biology stuff. I look at engineering stuff and my head explodes because I don't understand it. But there's a lot of information there that I need to do my biology work. if we're working in oil sands, David Janasic and I organized a workshop last year, and one of the questions we asked people was, we're talking about something in the oil sands, is there anything we can learn from coal? And we got answers from everything, because it was a coal guy who said it, to nothing, because it was an oil sands person who said it. And the problem with the nothing is you lose some opportunities to learn some things. Even if you have to change the context and change the filters that you think about it, there's some information there that you could learn. Ageism is a horrible thing. I know that because I'm old. But there is a tendency in some places to prefer more recent work and not older work. There are some journals, for example, that require you to cite references in descending order. Aside from the fact that as a reader, it's a horrible thing to do because then you got to bounce all over your references page. It simply promotes this idea that new stuff is better than old stuff. So I said that there's a whole bunch of places you can go and get information. This is probably not an exhaustive list, but I think it's interesting to have a look at the kinds of things that we in our community of practice tend to look at, right? The journals, the conferences, the research reports, maybe monitoring and data reports, versus the stuff that the public looks at. So part of our mission as educators and as researchers is to try and get information out, not just to ourselves, our specialist buddies, but to the broader public. And if we're doing this and they're looking here, we're missing some opportunities to do some education. I was going to put the government line on here because I was one before, and I suspect it probably goes from here with a strong emphasis and then up there for a second and then maybe down here. The one that I added last to this list and was one that I should have thought of before is this whole business of networking. We can't forget the value that exists from coming to groups like this, not listening to me. That's only part of the value. The other value is you guys talking amongst yourselves and saying what a lunatic that guy was, but maybe some of it I might be able to use. Going to conferences, all of that kind of stuff. You can learn a whole pile of things that aren't written down information. So, there are a whole bunch of peer-reviewed sources. It's interesting to note that there is currently no oil sands related journal. There's been some discussions about whether we should have one. Some tailings guys were talking about it. But remember, there used to be one. Okay, so the Auster Journal of Research was in place from 1984 to 1982. You can go to the Cameron Library, you can see it. A lot of focus on in situ type projects, but there is some mining stuff in there. So there was clearly a need identified at that time to have an oil sands specific focus. But now what you have to do, because there isn't one, you're going to have to go to all those specialist journals to try and find the information that you want. Some conference proceedings say that they're peer-reviewed. Some reports, like the Royal Society, are very arguably a peer-reviewed type source. Certainly there's a lot of value to that. I don't want you to think that I'm saying there isn't value. I just think that in some cases it may be overstated. I'm a big fan of the gray literature, maybe because I used to produce a lot of it, and I still am. I think it's important, even though we call it gray literature and don't lump it into the peer-reviewed category, that a lot of the materials are often reviewed by a bunch of respected scientific, regulatory type people, research people. And so, although they're not formally labeled peer-reviewed, I think some of them certainly have had some pretty significant workovers based on comments provided by experts. So we're going to go through some of the different kind of publication sources that you might want to look at. The primary reason I think that you should be going to look at government publications is that it's really all about setting the context for the kind of work that we do. You can go into documents and say, well, these are the issues that the government says it's working on. That seems to me to be a pretty good place to start developing research needs for an MSc or a BSc project or some other kind of project. It helps you understand why work is needed. So it also helps you understand what success looks like. So you're going to do a study and you're going to take a look at this particular parameter. Well, how do you know whether that's an important number that you get? Well, you go to a regulatory document and say, it has to be at least this or below that. And that gives you the context for then interpreting the results that you got. I went to a Conrad conference last year, I guess, and a number of students were presenting, and again, a bunch of people about my age got together afterwards, and one of the things that I heard a lot was, this is really good science that these guys are doing. They did really good jobs of doing presentations. they don't know why it's important. They don't have the context to be able to say, I have data, I have some information, I can't yet turn it into knowledge because I don't know what the context is for what I'm doing. I think that that's a horrible thing. I think it's really important for people who are doing this kind of work to be able to say, I understand why I'm doing it. It helps me design my project better. It helps me report my information better. So in terms of the provincial agencies related to oil sands type work, Alberta Environment, Water, Alberta Sustainable Resource Development, Alberta Energy, the ERCB. I should have said at the beginning, in the presentation, all these red ones are actually hyperlinked. It may not work when we put up the video, but I can make this available so that you can actually go in and do all the hyperlinking and go and follow these. Each of these agencies has different responsibilities. They will often have information about standards and that kind of thing. And they'll have policy documents and a whole bunch of other things that will really help you understand why you should be doing work. There's some federal agencies, Environment Canada, DFO, CanMet, or Natural Resources, including both CanMet, the guys out at Devon, and the Canadian Forest Service, and the Canadian Environmental Assessment Agency. Again, all of those are going to have the federal view on the world in terms of oil sands management. There's a whole bunch of information types as well, so not just the source, but the types. Legislation is really important because, again, it helps set the context. You'll be able to find out, what the rules are and why some of the things that you're doing is important. If you're going to go and look at legislation and cite that, always make sure you go to the Queen's Printer site for the most recent version. I just did a review for a law prof in Calgary, and he was in a current article citing the previous version of the legislation, and I'm thinking, I shouldn't have to tell you that, right? You should know that you should be able to go there. You can go into, through our site, into Alberta Environment's and Water's site, and get copies of the current oil sands mine approvals. Why would you want to do that? If you look at an oil sands mine approval in particular, but also some of the other approvals, in there's a whole pile of things that the companies must do research on. If I'm looking for a project to do, seems to me like a good place to go and say, well, if they need to know this and I have those skills, maybe I've got someone I can talk to. It'll also provide things like environmental limits so that you know, well, if that's what they have to do and what they have to meet, now I have a test for the research I'm doing, but I also have maybe some ideas around how I could tailor my research to address those particular issues that are in there. There are definitely policies and standards in there. Government's always continuously improving policies and standards. So again, it's a good place to look and say, well, I wonder why they're doing this. Maybe they don't know that some new information has come out, and it gives me an opportunity as a researcher or a student to go and talk to the regulators and say, hey, I can help you with this. There's some things that you might want to change. Government agencies do have a lot of research reports. Alberta Environment and Water in particular has an information site you can go to, and you can find a bunch of reports that they've done. Three things I want you to take away from this slide. First of all, a lot of these organizations are producing great literature. So you may hear this several times, right? This is one of my big bugs. So if you're not looking at great literature, you're missing a whole pile of stuff. Second thing that I want you to take away from this, if you don't know what these acronyms mean, you're already SOL in terms of your ability to go and find information, because you don't even know where you should start to go and look. Now, because I'm a nice guy, at the end of the slides, I've listed these acronyms out and what their long names are. I was seriously thinking about not doing it and making you go do your homework. The third thing I want you to take away from here is this last bullet. It's not enough to know what's currently going on. You need to know that a bunch of historical work was done. All of these are now gone. All of these organizations. All of the work they did is still available, hopefully easily, but in many cases not. But again, if you don't know where to go look, and especially if you're only looking at current information, you're going to be behind the eight ball in terms of your ability to go and find information. These are organized kind of government-ish type sites, monitoring sites, federal sites, and then the historical ones. Why would I want to go and look at industry publications? Again, it's in part about context, but they have to pull together a whole pile of information in the regulatory submissions, And a lot of the information that they collect is very useful background stuff for you when you're designing your project. So if you are looking at designing an air emissions project and their impact on vegetation, and you want to know what kind of emissions there are, well, they're going to tell you in their environmental impact assessment reports. They're going to tell you some of the equipment that they're using to manage that. They're going to talk about where they're measuring all of these emissions. They're going to talk about the models that they use. And you can use all of that information in designing your projects. They'll also talk about, here's what we know, and here's what we don't know, and here's what we're going to do about it. And it's the here's what we don't know and here's what we're going to do about it that you, as the research community, should be interested in, because you can go through the list and say, oh, I can help you with that. Why don't I give you a call and we'll see if we can get together. So very good source of information to help doing things like design. If you're in the engineering business, you can find all sorts of information about the equipment that they're using and all of that kind of thing as well. There's a whole bunch of other sources on campuses like this. That one of the most important products that we produce, I would argue, is the theses that the students prepare, right? Can you find them on campus? Before I created this slide, I had Thesis Canada because I found that by accident. I could not find a place on the U of A site that actually had theses listed. It took me a while to do. I'm actually on a distribution list for U of C theses because theirs is a little bit easier to find. But I did finally find one. There is a place on the U of A website where you can go and see a list of some of the theses. I think that it should be a showcase item. It should be on the front page of our website saying, this is what we do. This is one of the biggest values that we can add, both for the students and for the university as a whole, but it's hidden, and I think that's a horrible thing. There's a bunch of professional, technical, industry type organizations where you can get information. This isn't research information, this is more background information. It's also a good place to go and network. And again, I think there's a lot of opportunity. Not only should you know about these, but wherever possible, if they're professional organizations or just general community of practice type organizations, join them. Get in there and do the networking stuff. Not only does it help you meet people, but it helps you get exposure to a lot of different ideas. These guys are often producing proceedings from meetings that they have. They'll have newsletters, magazines, websites. All of that kind of stuff is a useful place to go and get information. NGOs, when you're a government person or an industry person, you kind of think of that as maybe a bad word. They're not really here to help us. But in fact, some of them do prepare research reports that are again useful for context. They're useful for understanding what different points of view people have when they're looking at arguably the same set of data. I was just at a conference this morning, and someone from Water Matters was taking the same information about what groundwater work is being done as the government person who talked about it a little bit later. And they sure didn't say the same thing, right? Because you have different ways of interpreting information. So go have a look at the materials that are produced by these guys. Get a sense for how they're taking data, because they may do the same thing to your data when you prepare, right? So get a sense for how they're taking that information and using it. The Impediments Institute is one that does a lot of reporting. The Environmental Law Center, someplace you wouldn't maybe normally think about going to. They've got some really interesting stuff. Strategy West, if you haven't seen what they do, is they put out at least a semi-annual, maybe even quarterly update on all the oil sands projects, their current status and all of that kind of stuff. So it's a really neat thing to go. There's a bunch of trade publications, again, relating to the professional organizations or others. Canadian Reclamation, I put that in here because I'm a CLRA fan. Oil Sands Review, Oil Week, they do have interesting articles in there. Again, I wouldn't call it science, but it is good information. Gives you some good contacts, gives you good access to websites. If you are more of a visual person, hey, we got an app for that too. So on our website, we have a whole bunch of different links to other websites. We've got a section on maps, so there's a whole bunch of really neat sites that have map-based information, including the brand new Alberta Environment, Water, Oil Sands Information Portal, or OSIP. If you want to know anything about what's happening in the current mining or in situ oil sands projects, you go onto this site. It's map-based, GIS-based. You can click on a particular project and you can get information about air, about water, chemistry, water use. You can get land disturbance. You can get production levels. You can get pretty well anything that you need. And you don't just get access to information. In many cases, you'll get access to the data itself. So you can pull that data off and you can do things with it. If you're even more visually focused and you want videos, we've got a bazillion videos related to oil sands on our site. I think for educators, both in universities and colleges, but also especially I think maybe in high school, if you're looking for things to spice up your lectures, you can pull off all sorts of different views that people have about oil sands. One of the neatest ones we just put on is actually not even a video because it's so old. It's a radio interview from 1965 from CBC, and it's talking with the people who were just building what was then the Great Canadian Oil Sands, what is now Suncor. And you listen to the issues that they're talking about and say, wow, is that ever cool? Because some of it's changed and some of it really hasn't. And so I think there's some really neat stuff in here that you can go and have a look at. Sources you wouldn't really think about. So legal actions. We're generally not a very litigious society in Canada, certainly not like the States, but there are legal things that happen. And it's really interesting, again, to see what people are using science for in terms of things related to legal action. So you can go to the Environmental Appeals Board website and see what kinds of appeals have been launched relative to things like reclamation or issuing approvals. And look at the positions that the people have that they're putting forward to the board in terms of what happened and how they've interpreted what the rules are and what they've done to try and deal with those. You can go and look on the Alberta Environment and Water site in particular. There's a long list of pending or past court cases as well and types of charges issued. So you can take a look at that and say, there's a long list of these things, and obviously those are problems. Either they're problems that people have in understanding what the rules are, or problems that they have in implementing the protection measures necessary to meet those rules. That sounds to me like something that might need some research, right? I mean, if people need help in these areas. There are certainly NGO and First Nations challenges, especially around the oil sands. Again, very interesting to go and have a look at the kinds of things that are being challenged. Take a look at the court decisions. In particular, Alberta is using a lot of what we call creative sentences. The university's been a big recipient of those. In particular, Colleen Cassidy St. Clair's lab got a big creative sentence amount of money because of the Syncrude Ducks trial, but other people have gotten those, and it's interesting to see that an opportunity can come out of something bad, right? And we should be able to capitalize on those kinds of things. So we as researchers should be out there looking at these court decisions and trying to figure out, well, what might come out of this? If it's a creative sentence, is it something that I could help with and maybe get some money for? Because wouldn't that be really cool too, right? We have on our website what I think is probably the most underutilized thing that we have there, and that's our who's who. I think it's a great opportunity for a place where you can go get your name listed, the areas that you're specializing in with respect to oil sands. I made I'm sorry about this, I made a deliberate decision that we're not going to put students in there because they change over and it's difficult to manage the system, but profs and that kind of stuff, if you want to be on there, by all means get a hold of me. And what I hope it can be used for is, I want to work on this area of specialization. Who else is doing that kind of stuff? And in particular, who else in funding places might be doing this kind of stuff, right? So we can make those linkages. So online and searchable sources. I'm not going to pretend that the web is the best place to go find scientific information, but it is a really neat place to go and find information about how people are thinking about things. And again, I think it'll give you some good context for work that you might be doing. There's all sorts of publicly searchable engines. I'm not going to tell you about those. You can certainly go into the library and use scholarly type engines to find information. There are, that I've been able to find anyway, 4 oil sands specific engines. We have them linked on our website. Dr. Nath has one here on the U of A looking at revegetation. The Cumulative Environmental Management Association has one related to reclamation. We're in the process of working with them to update that. There's the Alberta Water Portal and the Energy Information Platform. So each of those you can go in, you can do queries. They're more or less friendly, but at least it'll give you, again, some of the sources you might be able to go to. Government and University Library, you probably all know this, they're all hooked together. When you get the hits, a lot of particular regulatory type documents are not necessarily here on campus. You'll have to go over to the Government of Alberta Library and get those, but they've got a lot of really neat information there as well. I'm a big promoter of the university's Education and Research Archive thing. We're probably one of their, right now, I think one of their bigger customers because of all the things that we've been putting in there. But I like it because it's got a guaranteed lifetime URL and it's a relatively easy system to use. You don't have to register for it like you do for SEMA and for some of the other ones, and it's available to anybody. So we're putting all of our stuff in there, and I would encourage everyone on campus, if you're looking for a place to house your work and make it publicly available, this is a great system to use. So I talked about some of the search caveats and the impediments that we have with respect to language. So OSRIN uses oil sands 2 words, not oil sands 1 word, and never, ever, ever tar sands in any combination of words. But you get very different research or search results if you go on Google and put in those different words, right? So you can't just go and look at the right way to spell it, because I said that's the way to spell it. You have to look at all of them if you want to get a wide variety of hits. If you look at these ones, you're probably going to get a little bit more of the positive spin of the world, and if you look at these ones, you might get an other spin on the world, but you need to know what both of those are. It's not enough to send your students off and say, well, go find out about tailings, because you may get some of the results, but you won't get them all, because there's MFT and there's CT and there's TT and there's TFT, and there's not just the acronyms, but there's the words behind those. So you got to be really careful about what it is that you're looking for to make sure that you get the right information. I'm in the mining field. There's a lot of in situ work. If you just plug in oil sands, you're going to get both. So you got to decide, am I looking for both? Because there's a lot of similarities, or am I looking very specifically for one or the other and narrow your search? There's a difference between heavy oil and bitumen. There's differences in the way they're processed. There's certainly differences in the regulatory schemes, even though it doesn't make sense and there really shouldn't be. That's just the way the regulatory schemes are set up. So again, decide what it is that you're looking for. Don't be shy about looking at the other stuff and saying, well, that's kind of interesting that there are some of these differences here. Are you looking to find out about bitumen, or are you looking to find about synthetic crude oil? It will come up with some different results there as well. Organizations change their names more frequently than most of us change our shorts. So this is a big problem, right? Especially if you're interested in looking for older information. Take a look at my alma mater, Alberta Environment. When I started, we went to Alberta Environmental Protection. We went back to Alberta Environment, and now we're Alberta Environment and Water. If you send out your student to say, I want you to find that Alberta Environment reference, may or may not be able to, because it may be under a completely different name. Same for Energy and Natural Resources, went to Forestry, Lands and Wildlife, went to Alberta Environmental Protection because they got married, then they got divorced, and they became Alberta Sustainable Resource Development. As I said yesterday, thank God they had no children, because that would have been really ugly. Companies are just as bad as the government, okay? So if you send your student out to find the EIA for Suncor's Fort Hills project, they're going to come back and say there isn't one. What the hell are you talking about? And you say, oh, that's right, it was Petro-Canada. They inherited that when they bought them. So they go out and they look for Petro-Canada, and they say, no, there isn't one of those. So where did it actually happen? Well, the actual project began with True North Energy Partners. So you need to be able to understand what all of these sequences are so that you can find the information that you're looking for. I should know this, but I was looking for Fort Hills Energy Partners because that's what I thought it was called. And I was getting really frustrated because I wanted to put this in this presentation. So I ended up having to scroll through the whole list of EIAs before I said, oh yeah, that's right. So just some warnings about some of the things that you might want to be looking for. So given all of that, those problems / opportunities that exist out there, what are we doing about it? So as I said, one of my mandates is to increase awareness of and access to oil sands information. I want to try and provide you, if you go onto our site, with an unbiased, broad view of the world. I got asked yesterday when I did a presentation, do I filter these? The answer is yes, I do. It's a very coarse filter. I said my test was really, am I going to throw up when I read this thing? And if it is, it's probably not going to go in there. It's filtering the two extremes, so the absolutely rabid pro-oil sands and the absolutely insane anti-oil sands. Think of it as kind of a sewage system. It's the big lumps I don't want to get through. There's some lumps that are getting through that I personally don't agree with. But I think it's important that people see access to that kind of stuff. Go to our website if you want to find out. We've got some pretty neat features in there aside from the ones I've told you. One is that we're constantly adding news information that's out in the media. And so you can go every day and see new stuff related to oil sands. We do have a bi-weekly email-based newsletter that'll tell you what's been added to the site since the last one. I think that's a really neat thing for for anyone who's interested in oil sands in general. As I said, for researchers and educators, there's a ton of links there that you can go through and find about information about just about anything that you might be interested in. I mentioned some of these old research areas. For those of you who don't know, the Alberta Oil Sands Environmental Research Program, it's actually who I got hired by when I first came out to Alberta. It was a research program in the late 70s, early 80s. We've digitized 127 of those reports now. You can get on there and look at them. We're about to jump into the next batch. Those ones were primarily the land-based and the water-based ones. We're going to start doing the air-based ones and the human health ones. The Reclamation Research Technical Advisory Committee had an oil sands component to it, so we've digitized those reports, as well as some of the general province-wide ones. A couple of other government reports that we've digitized, and we're going to try and get access to more of those. And as I said, we're updating and improving the SEMA searchable bibliography. So, out of all of that, what are the key messages? Absolutely try and get access to the broadest possible range of information. It'll help you to focus the research that you want to do on things that matter to people who need to have information. Industry has needs, regulators have needs. I think it's really cool if we think up our own ideas and pitch them to people, but I think you'll have a lot more success if you say, I know you have this problem, and here's what I can do to help you with it. It'll also give a lot more meaning to your work because you'll be able to do something that is solving a problem. And I think it will absolutely help us to stop reinventing the wheel. There are not enough resources around for us to be doing stuff that's already been done. I don't mind if you say, this was done a long time ago, the methods have changed and that kind of stuff, and that's why I want to do it. I get really cranky when you say, I don't even know that was done, and this is the best and brightest idea that I've had this week, because you really aren't going to accomplish very much. Go outside your comfort zones when you're looking for stuff. Look for gray literature. Go outside into other disciplines and other sources that you wouldn't normally go to. Yes, you'll be throwing stuff out because it's not relevant, and yes, you may be cursing at all the stuff that's out there, but I can guarantee you that there will be some things in places that you wouldn't normally have looked that will be really interesting and that you could use, or you could share with someone and earn some brownie points. And again, I think we have it within our grasp to be the solution and not the problem. I think we can teach people better in terms of this being the way to do things. I think we can make every effort possible to share the information that we have so that other people can learn from us and so that they don't reinvent the wheel. And I would absolutely encourage all of us on campus here and anyone else we work with to try and get the older information that we have available to us now, get it available to people. Get it digitized, because unfortunately that's the way the world is, and it really should be digital to be accessible to people. But a lot of us in our offices have stuff that would be really interesting for people to see, and it's just a shame that it's sitting there turning into mold instead of being accessible to people. I think that's it.
Chris, I liked your beginning statement And I think George Ball from entomology said it very well many years ago. He said the function of the university is to learn new knowledge, to preserve old knowledge, and teach both.
I gotta write that down.
Yeah. I thought it was extremely well stated.
You can't all actually agree with what I said, so come on. David.
Part of the issue, I think, is that the audience is so heterogeneous because there are some people that just want sound bites. They want to know what the area of disturbance of oil sands is all the way across. Do you have a target audience in mind, or do you just aim for whomever can find
I'm making my stuff available to anyone who comes to our site. And my hope is they'll learn something from it. And what I don't have it on here, but what I say, or to position our website, is I hope that this is the start of your journey into oil sands information. You're not going to find all the answers on my site. You'll find a whole bunch of them. But it's to get you interested in looking at the options that are out there and not just going to your favorite source. I would hope, at a minimum, that our community of practice, our research community is interested. I would hope the education community is interested. I hope Joe and Jane Public are interested. I certainly hope the guys that are giving me money are interested, the regulators, right? Because I think there's a lot of stuff in there that's of value. I don't want to turn away people. It's not intended to do that. There was one. Yeah.
Is there any hope that we're gonna get some consolidation of some of these agencies? It's just a dizzying number of different groups that are working, especially from the industry perspective. And I was just astonished at the number of acronyms that you put before us today. I bet there were 150 that you popped out over the...
Yep. So and here's the newest one. Canadian Oil Sands Innovation Alliance, and I think that's the start of what you're talking about, because this is a combination, as I understand it, at least now, of Conrad, Osley, and I think even OSTC. So the Oil Sands Tailings Consortium, the Canadian Oil Sands Network for Research and Development, and what was the other one I said? The Oil Sands Leadership Initiative. And the reason for that is just what you said. They're concerned that they're spreading their resources too far out and that there's overlap and duplication. I think on campus, I think we do the same kinds of things by forming partnerships, right? So School of Energy and Environment is intended to be a place where you can bring together people from different disciplines, and in the best of all worlds, you'd have someone come in and say, I have a research need. Can you help me find the right people to do it, or can you pull together a team? There's a current water initiative going on campus where we're looking at doing the same thing for water. Arguably, AILS and its structure is trying to do the same thing by saying, if you have a research need, I got this really cool team of people that we can put together on it. Or if you just have a need for one specialist, I can get that for you too. If I were a power mad kind of guy, then I would say, yes, there's absolutely a need, and I know just who should do that. I think researchers are a bit of a different breed, so it's a little bit hard for us to do. But I think on the funding side, I think you're going to see that a lot more. And certainly the government guys are getting together more and more and saying, here's what the government needs to know, not just the individual organizations. They do have different needs, and so they are going to have different voices at different times. But I think you're starting to see more of a common voice there.
I make an observation, though, from the perspective of somebody who wants to do research on oil sands. There's a tremendous amount of personal overhead that is required that you have to invest into developing the background and all the connections and all this dizzying array of bodies that are functioning. If you just did some work on something relatively straightforward in biology, you would have relatively little of this overhead.
Yeah.
So it's a real disadvantage.
It is, but if I was a cynic, I'd say we could exploit that, because now I got 7 different people I could go to for money, as opposed to if they do consolidate, it'll just be one. On the other hand, if they do consolidate, it'll be one with a big pot of money, as opposed to trying to get bits and pieces from others. So I agree with you. I think everyone's going to be a lot better off with a consolidated place where you can go and say, what are the needs that you have? Let me make you aware of what my set of skills is and my team is, so that we can help you with that. Give me one place I can go to ask for money instead of 7 or 8. Those kinds. Give me one forum where I can go and present, as opposed to having to take your project and shop it off to 3 or 4 different places. I think there's a lot of benefits to it, but I think we have to do it ourselves as researchers. We have to say, I'm no longer a silo. I should be part of a team, because these are big problems that require integrated solutions. I think we're getting a lot better at it, certainly than we were a long time ago. But I think there's a lot more that we could do to say, look at the wide range of skills we have on a campus like this. We need to get together and say, as a team, we could do this. We just got 4 new oil sands-based research chairs in the journal today, right? Where are they going to fit in? I mean, is that a good thing or is that a bad thing, right? Yeah, well, okay. But right again, right? So are they going to be silos, or is there a mechanism to integrate so that when someone comes on campus, do they know, A, where to go? Is there a central place where they can say, I have a problem, I need someone to help me with it? And B, will they actually work together, or do they have to focus on themselves to move forward? I think the other thing that I would really like to see, and again, I try and do it for the few times that people come to me, is to have an attitude that says we're all part of a pool and we should be supporting each other. So someone comes to me and says, I've had students come and say, well, can I come and do a PhD with you? So, well, I don't do that, but I know some people I can farm your application off to if you want. Or a researcher comes in and says, or a company comes and says, I have this problem, do you know who can do this? And I said, well, I know a couple of names, so I fire them off, right? I mean, that's a good thing for all of us to do, because we should all be supporting each other. But it's a mindset you have to have, right?
You have the advantage, though, of being funded to do that type of work.
Yes.
And what happens when you're not doing oil sands research with a big pot of money behind it to get that kind of connection in play? I mean, the value of the personal connections is irreplaceable.
Yep, absolutely. So, again, I think there's some opportunities. I'm a little bit sensitive. I like the idea of networking. I like the idea of being able to say, I'd like to know what everyone else is doing. I think it's good for all of us to do that. I think there are some sensitivities everywhere. It's not just on campus. It's everywhere about, why are you interested in what I'm doing? And that's another advantage that I have, is that I have money. I'm not competing with you to get money, right? So there's maybe some incremental value in you knowing me, as opposed to you knowing some other researcher who's also going to the same company to get some money. So take advantage of it, right? I mean, if there's a role that we can play to make sure that we know who you are and what you do, then why not, right? Because I'm not really competing with you. Yes?
What about copyright and patent issues?
You mean in terms of the impediments to information? Or?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's certain things you can't do, right? I've had people come and say, I really like what you're doing in terms of digitizing reports. Can you put these ones up? I said, not unless you have the authority to tell me to do it, right? Because I don't want to go to jail. So if we can't do things like that, but I think we should be testing whether or not we can or can't. I've said this a couple of times, and it hasn't made me any friends whatsoever, but you take a look what the Oil Sands Tailings Consortium did. They got together and said, you know what, this patent business, it's getting in the way of our ability to work together. And so they've agreed to start sharing information, even though it's protected, so that they can have more of an integrated approach to problem solving and more of a collaborative approach. I think, and I could well be wrong, but I think it won't take them too long before they start looking at their providers and saying, we're sharing, we're getting rid of patent blocks, when are you guys going to start doing it? And I think we need to start preparing ourselves for the day when they say, you want money and you want to come on board? You don't do patents anymore. You don't do IP stuff. Get rid of that, because we need to be sharing our stuff as well as they are. Will that happen? I don't know. But if I was over there and I started looking at the time and effort I've spent into trying solving a problem, and then the problem now becomes someone else, there's other people I can work with. Right?
Well, Chris, thank you for coming here to share your wisdom on information management with us. I think we all appreciate it. One thing I need to tell you, all our seminars are on the web. Okay, therefore you can view these slides on our website, in our department's website. Okay. Therefore, please join me in thanking Chris to come and talk to us.